Good morning, David and Dr. Carson.
Good morning.
Sorry to disturb you at so early hours, but what we can do. But we are really excited to hear you guys. And before you start, I would take a few minutes to let me introduce to the gathering about Mr. David and Dr. Carson or Roberts. And in inaugural, though I spoke, but with few words only. So David is a bachelor's in biology and a master's in finance, and he is the founder and chief executive of Headwall Photonics. And those who are working on hyperspectral and imaging spectrometer, I think Headwall Photonics is not unknown to them. So it's a global provider of imaging spectrometers for various applications, starting from post-harvest, defense, and you name anything. So imaging spectrometer has that applications, and David is leading some of the algorithms with the instruments to see that those solutions are there. So he has been 20 years of experience of a startup company as Headwall Photonics, and now it is well established and known in the field of imaging spectroscopy. And you will be wanted to know some of these sensors are already on the satellite platforms of some of the hyperspectral missions, and that is taken from Headwall Photonics. And David has a third numerous technology and application articles, and they established many key patents in the area of spectral imaging, solving some of the spectral related problems and solutions. And he addressed many industry association forums and large gatherings, giving an understanding of topics of spectral sensing and imaging technology. And we have been interacting with David as long as imaging spectrometer is concerned, IRI since long. And we have been planning to get a physical training on airborne hyperspectral remote sensing somehow. Because of COVID, it couldn't happen. So I thought of, why don't you use this opportunity to invite David for this purpose. So with him, his co-colleague, Dr. Carson Roberts, he's a senior application engineer in Headwall Photonics and a PhD from Brown University, and a wonderful teacher, and a very broad experience in different fields of hyperspectral imaging, designing, computer modeling, and experience in computational neurosciences. And he's a senior engineer leading to Headwall Remote Sensing suite of products, and particular focus on technical and application of development with respect to hyperspectral imaging solutions. So his expertise includes sensor fusion, most notably is the integration of hyperspectral and LiDAR. And the airborne hyperspectral remote sensing, as I showed you, one of the nano hyperspec what we have is again borrowed, is taken from Headwall only. So they have a couple of products like this, which can be taken off on UAV, and with all team effort, they have wonderful solutions for airborne hyperspectral imaging. And again, Dr. Carson, to his strength, he is a UAV pilot and frequent requested numerous industry events and remote sensing conferences. I think Carson and David, it's not enough to be in this 1 hour to cover whole airborne hyperspectral remote sensing. We know huge application it has, but always we'll look forward to have physically over here, and look for some program where you people can be over here and show us all those potential applications. And with this, I would request both David and Carson to take up the stage. And most irritated, and for me at least, being a hyperspectral remote sensing expert, looking forward to see what are the possible technological advances you have with respect to the drone remote sensing. Over to David and Dr. Carson.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Sahu. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your colleagues. I realize we had first talked and planned about this workshop back in February, and I think we've made numerous, I had numerous plane tickets, but unfortunately, COVID certainly got the best of us back then at the beginning of the year. But I want to thank you for the opportunity to present to your audience. Tremendous turnout. I understand you've got over 600 registrants, so I'm certainly happy to participate. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity, as well as thank our colleagues at Electrotech for the opportunity to speak with your team there. So I think what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes and talk about a little bit about Headwall, what we do, and some of the projects that we're working on. And then what I'd like to do is turn it over to my colleague, Carson Roberts, who can spend a fair amount of time, the bulk of the time, really discussing hyperspectral imagery, integration of LiDAR, and how we develop imagery for numerous applications such as agriculture, geology, and infrastructure inspection. So would you like to turn the presentation over to me, and then I ask you to allow Carson to present when it comes to his piece?
You can go ahead with you. You have, right?
I've got the screen.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can say it. I think that will be better. You want me to do? I have not downloaded yet.
No, we can certainly try it. I'm going to see if we can share screen now.
Yeah.
And be right with you, share, and we're going to
Yes, it is.
share this particular screen.
Yeah.
Do you see a full screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So why don't I just kind of move right ahead. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I'll spend a few minutes and talk about Headwall and some of the things that we've been doing, and then I'll turn it over to Carson, and he can complete the presentation per your request there. So a couple of you folks may know Headwall, but just from a thumbnail perspective, the company's been around 17 years, slightly more than 60 employees. We do have a global presence. As I mentioned, one of our key partners is Electrotech over in Chennai. And our focus has really been on 4 markets as a company. Military defense is a remote sensing market. That was really our first market sector that we focused on. And then commercial remote sensing, machine vision, and medical and biotech is an emerging area for our hyperspectral imaging products. Our focus has really been to move up the value chain to provide more integrated solutions for our customers. We obviously provide hyperspectral imagers from the UV through the visible near infrared, shortwave infrared, and beyond. But really, we've spent a lot of our development time working on integrating these systems into numerous platforms, and then really kind of driving application knowledge and application capability through software and algorithms. And that's really been a key aspect and a key differentiator of our company, as we've really worked hard to engineer the complexity out of these solutions so that a whole host of agronomists and agriculturists can use these systems. So in terms of our product capability, as I mentioned, we cover 4 broad markets, from government remote sensing through medical and biotech. But one of the things that we're particularly proud of is we really have a diverse product line that extends up through what I'll call the air column. We obviously at the lowest level, we offer ground-based monitoring systems, either field tripod-based systems or even tractor-mounted systems, and I'll show you an example of some of the things we're doing there. We spent a lot of our time on integrating onto UAV platforms, which we'll also talk about, and that'll be the bulk of Carson's presentation, up through manned aircraft and all the way up into low Earth orbit. And as an example, one of the things that we're very proud of is that we had an opportunity to work with JAXA and the Japan Space Systems team. And last December, we launched our Hisui instrument up onto the International Space Station. The Hisui instrument was a couple years in development, and it is a binaire and SWIR instrument. So we're getting a full spectral bandpass from 400 to 1,000 nanometers with the binaire, and then 900 to 2,500 nanometers with the SWIR instrument. So that was successfully launched. It's on the space station, And as we speak, it is transmitting data down to the research team. So very happy and proud of that. If you look at some of the things that we've done in the industry, Headwall typically prides itself on technical innovation and introducing new and compelling products to our customers and in our research organizations. You know, for example, if we go way back to 2004, 2005, Headwall was the first hyperspectral imager that was really deployed on a UAV at the time. And back then, it was used for real-time target detection on the Predator aircraft. But I think just that application alone certainly is an indicator of just how robust and these solutions need to be in these very, very harsh environments. Soon after that, Headwall was the first company to introduce a commercial SWIR sensor. Obviously, the veneer provides great vegetative information, but we really saw an awful lot of application benefit by extending our product line through the shortwave infrared from 900 to 2500 nanometers. And we introduced back in 2007 the first commercial SWIR hyperspectral sensor that's out there. And over the last few years, we've really focused our development on this wave of drone-based UAV operations. We've done a couple of things which are really unique to our company. Specifically, we introduced a veneer SWIR co-aligned system that actually flies on these small multi-rotor UAVs. Shortly after that, a couple of years ago, we introduced a high-resolution fluorescence imager, which provides basically a 1/10 of a nanometer spectral resolution over very slight bandpass, small bandpass. We did this because we were working with NASA and working with the European Space Agency to provide some of the data products for the upcoming FLEX mission, which should be launched in the next few years. And as I'm sure the audience is aware, fluorescence imaging is one of the best indicators of crop yield and crop health that we can possibly get. So we've moved forward to the point where we've really integrated a number of different systems together with our hyperspectral technology. We typically will integrate LiDAR, which Carson will talk about, thermal, as well as hyperspectral in a very compact package that works well together. The software is an overall architecture for operating and assembling and ortho-rectifying these complete data sets. And that has really been the focus of our efforts over the last few years, sensor fusion. So with that, I want to just spend a couple minutes and talk about two projects that we've been involved with that you may be aware of. One of which is the ARPA-E Terra 1 and Terra 2 projects, which is really focused on field-based phenotyping. This is a really important and visible project that we've been working on primarily with our colleagues out at Purdue University, specifically Dr. Melba Crawford. And the Headwall instruments, both veneer and SWIR sensors, have been flown on the multi-rotor UAVs, as well as on what they call the Pheno rover, which is a tractor-based system, and you can see that in the lower left corner of the slide here. So what we've been able to do here is work with the Purdue team and a few other teams, and really, as most people know out there, plant breeding really focuses on selecting the best genotype, the best plant genotype out there. And through these systems, Headwall has been working on the data acquisition aspect to develop machine learning algorithms that will help to select these best genotypes that are out there. One of the key things that has been, or key activities surrounding this project, has been the integration of LiDAR for trait prediction on this plant phenotyping project. We'll talk a little bit about LiDAR in the next presentation. Certainly happy to provide a lot of detail. If anyone's particularly interested, we can discuss this offline. But obviously, as you can see, the LiDAR affords, when merged with the hyperspectral, affords great benefit relative to height of the plants, canopy cover, biomass index, and there's a number of other LiDAR indices that that Dr. Crawford and the Purdue team have come up with specifically on penetration and complexity of the biomass canopy there. So that's a really very exciting, very successful project for the participants. The second phase of this was recently awarded at the beginning of the year. So we've got a couple more years of funding that'll contribute to the development of some of this new machine learning algorithms and approaches for field-based phenotyping. And the last slide that I want to present, which we're very proud of, is Headwall in association with Purdue, University of Florida, and the University of California at Merced were awarded a major contract for by the National Science Foundation, which is entitled The Internet of Things for Precision Agriculture, IoT for Ag. And obviously there's such a demand for increased crop yields, increased food production, and in a finite number of resources out there for food production capability. The intent of this particular project is really to string together both ground-based systems, soil sensors, airborne systems into a unique ecosystem and infrastructure to leverage all of the different capabilities of these sensors. This is a project that I would certainly like to continue discussing with Dr. Sahu, as I believe that there are some rather significant opportunities where we can translate some of the information, some of the learnings from this project to some of the work that the IARI people are working on. So I'll keep you posted on this one. This was an award that was just made over the last month. We're very excited about it and looking forward to working with some of the leading agronomists out of the United States. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Carson. And Carson, I think you should be in a position where you can take control of that.
Okay, I'll take control and I'll run this from my computer.
Yes.
See if I can do that. Nope, you need to stop sharing your screen first, David.
Yeah, I'm taking care of that right now. Give me 1 minute. Hold on, Carson, I'm with you.
Okay.
There we go. Should be you.
All right, let's see if, okay. I'm just gonna share screen and I'm going to share this one. All right, can everybody see my screen that says Infrastructure, Vegetation, Health, and Economic Geology using drones and hyperspectral LiDAR imaging?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to present here. We were all very disappointed. I was very much looking forward to taking another trip to India, and let's hope that we all get through the other side of this pandemic doing well. So I'm going to give an overview of a lot of the remote sensing work that we have done. Some of the work is based on, is looking at plants and identifying plants and protecting infrastructure. And then I wanted to share a little bit, it's not really agriculture, but it's some very interesting stuff that we have done in geology, where there's a real application for this kind of technology. So here's an overview of 3 different types of systems that we have that use LiDAR, the laser radar, and various different hyperspectral instruments. So in the upper left, we've got a system where we have our nano hyperspec, that's a visible near infrared instrument, and a LiDAR and a GPS all on a gimbal on a drone. In the lower center, we have a very similar system, but this one is just hard mounted to the drone. And in the upper right, you see our co-aligned system with a LiDAR, and it's not actually the same size as the control tower at the Atlanta airport, but it was a cool picture. We were doing some looking at the runways and looking for decay of the concrete using the spectroscopy there at the airport. So this is a system that was used for some of the work that I'll be presenting you. You can see the LiDAR, the little blue thing in the center of it is the box that holds our GPS, and then you can see the lens of our Hyperspec Nano looking down. This is a visible near-infrared instrument, 900 to 1,000 nanometers, and about 270 spectral bands. And then the LiDAR is at 903 nanometers. Now, an interesting thing is the LiDAR is at 903 nanometers. It's right inside the band that can be seen by our imager, but the LiDAR pulses are nanoseconds in length, and they are not detected in our hyperspectral imagery, so there's no, in some sense, pollution from this active system. And then this system right here, David mentioned it a little bit before. It is inside the white box. There are a Hyperspec Nano, so that's a visible near-infrared, 400 to 1,000 nanometers, and a Hyperspec SWIR 640, so that's shortwave infrared, 900 to 2,500 nanometers, and a LiDAR mounted at the on the side of the system. And this particular package can go through and map and generate hyperspectral images of whatever it flies over. It's really sort of been the workhorse for a lot of the geology and some of the agricultural work that we've been doing. All these systems, as you can see, we've been flying mostly on the DJI M600 drones with or without a gimbal. Our larger systems tend not to have gimbals. But we are also integrating with other drone systems as time goes forward. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of what hyperspectral imaging is, and particularly how we do it at Headwall. But very simply, in a normal image, a color image on your computer, there's three numbers that describe, there's 5 numbers that describe each pixel. There's its X and Y location, its row and column, and then a red and a green and a blue value to describe its color. In a spectral imager, each pixel is described by 2 plus n numbers. Once again, 2 numbers to give you the row and column, and then the n numbers being the 270 different wavelengths at which we have information in the case of this nano. The way we do this is by slit scan imaging. Seems like a kind of ridiculous way to take pictures, but it's the very, very good way for getting high resolution imagery with spectral information. So instead of looking at the entire scene, we break the scene up into pixels. We look at just a slit. And so we're looking now at just one portion of the image, and we travel along to build up the image. It's called push broom imaging. And then what we do is we take that slit, so that's just one set of spatial pixels, and we spread it out in a spectral dimension so that for each pixel, so that's this pixel down here at the bottom, we have information from the blue out into the red. And the way that we spread that spectral information out is by re-imaging the slit through what we call a modified Offner spectrometer. A 4-optic makes an image onto the slit. A 3-mirror array refocuses the slit onto a focal plane array, and the second of those 3 mirrors is a diffraction grating, and so the blue light lands at the top of the focal plane array, the near-infrared light lands at the bottom of the focal plane array, and for each line of the image, we get a full spectrum for every pixel. And then this is the system that we drag across over the ground, line by line, building up our hyperspectral image, which then gives us pixels, and each pixel we can do spectroscopic analysis on. And so our systems are hyperspectral systems. There are other systems that are used for these sorts of things that are called multispectral systems. In a multispectral system, you'll generally have fewer than 10 wavelengths. And then what's generally done is to take indices which are ratios in some way of these wavelengths. And one of the most common is NDVI, the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. But in this slide right here shows it is a little bit sensitive to exactly the angle of the sunlight. And so in some sense, we would expect these low NDVI areas to indicate areas where the plants are less healthy, but in the same region, a couple hours apart, you'll see there's differences. Now, by using some more wavelengths, choosing a different spectral range, we can go to this enhanced vegetation index, where you can see very similar results both in the at noon and later on in the day. And this is the real advantage of the hyperspectral imagery over multispectral imagery, that you get many more chances to do the analysis. And then when I start talking about what we're doing in terms of identifying different materials in the scene, and particularly identifying different minerals in the geology, we really need this entire spectrum in order to be able to tell what is in our scene. Okay, so we're flying along. We take millions or thousands and thousands of lines, but we need to get each of those lines to line up next to the other one while the aircraft is constantly pitching and rolling and yawing and going up and down. So how do we place everything on the ground such that the pixel of the top of the plant ends up right where the top of the plant should be? Now, what we try and do then is take our image that we make, where of course it goes through a lens and everything is somewhat distorted, and project each pixel down directly onto the right portion of the ground. And in order to do that, we trace rays from our sensor down to the ground, and we need to have an accurate digital elevation model which says at each point how high up is the ground, because as the rays go down, they can be intercepted by higher bits. We have some moderately complicated algorithms that take in a digital elevation model, take in all the information from our GPS, which tells us where the aircraft is, from our inertial measurement unit, which tells where the aircraft was pointing, and with the GPS IMU data, the digital elevation model, and the imagery, we can work together to make an ortho-rectified image. So here on the left, I'm showing what a typical raw image looks like. So there's a line, and then another line, and another line, and another line, and another line. This is 2,000 lines. And you can see as the aircraft moved, these tarps ended up being a little wavy. We have sharp edges, because every line is exactly 640 pixels, but in some sense, the scene was moving around relative to the imager. So with an accurate digital elevation model and doing ray tracing from the imagers, we can generate this ortho-rectified image where the parts in the scene are nice and square, but the edges of the scene are a little bit wavy. And so having this digital elevation model is key to generating the ortho-rectified image, and we get the digital elevation model through using our LiDAR. So we have a suite of software that we've developed here at Headwall, where we can take the raw LiDAR data and we can turn it into a point cloud. And then I'll show you a couple point clouds. And then we can take the point cloud and turn it into a digital elevation model. Now, a point cloud is a three-dimensional data structure where there's a large number of points, and each point is given a position in three-dimensional space. A digital elevation model is a two-dimensional data structure where every point on the ground is given some elevation relative to some datum. Okay, so I talked about our imagers being line scan imagers, and we take only one line of imagery at a time. In a similar sense, the LiDAR is also sort of a line scan imager, but they will use typically 16 or sometimes 32 or more lines, and these lines are swept as the aircraft flies along. The laser beams sweep across and generate returns at different altitudes. This is one rotation of the LiDAR, which takes about 1/10 of a second, looked at from the side and from above and from the side, and we always get a little reflection from the rotors of our aircraft up above. Okay, and once again, remember, although we're shining laser light onto the ground, we're not detecting laser light with our hyperspectral imagers. So, the first thing I'd like to talk about is some flights we took over a railroad in Germany, about 1/2 kilometer of track. We flew down and back, and the idea was we wanted to look at how we can tell whether there might be vegetation encroaching on the railway. And a little bit of a spoiler, we did this in Germany. The Germans are very, very neat and careful people. There is no vegetation intruding on their infrastructure. But it was a very nice way to demonstrate the basic ideas of this, and we generously had the production of the German railway, who actually stopped their trains so that we could fly back and forth over half a kilometer of their track. So the instrument that we used was our nano hyperspec with a LiDAR mounted on a gimbal, one of those systems I showed you. The aircraft flew back and forth, and this right here is the point cloud that we generated from that. So this is not the hyperspectral image, this is the three-dimensional image of the area over which we flew. The hyperspectral image is only going to cover just over the railroad. The LiDAR has a much wider swath. So when we fly with a LiDAR and a spectral imager, we're always guaranteed that we have full coverage of the ground, and we can generate a nice digital elevation model, and then we can proceed to fuse the spectral imagery or the data products from that spectral imagery with the three-dimensional image to make three-dimensional spectral images. And so, as I said, we do always get reflections from the aircraft, and so you can see the aircraft took off right near this bridge, flew up, flew around here, got to the beginning of its program flight, flew on a program back and forth, and then returned to home. Now, in this three-dimensional point cloud, I can always eliminate this, this track of the aircraft, but it's very useful in doing the data processing to see where were we, if anything might have gone wrong, if there's any particular why didn't we image that thing, we can see exactly where we were. And then it's very easy in LiDAR point cloud editing software to just remove this trajectory once you know where you're going. And so that's what I've done for the future images, and to enable me to make a digital elevation model. Of course, I wouldn't want these things 100 meters in the air to be part of my digital elevation map. So if we go back one slide, you can see that there's the railroad tracks. And so I carefully colored this to have the railroad rails be red, the tracks and the gravel be varying scales of green. So this is a railroad track with railroad ties that are set into gravel, and that's I tried to highlight the different parts. That's one of the neat things that you can do in LiDAR imagery, is you can set different colors to different parts to really help differentiate the image that you're looking at. And then, because it's a three-dimensional image, it's always really fun to actually show how this thing works. And so what I'm doing is I've taken a bunch of images in a three-dimensional point cloud, and you can see there's the railroad, the trees beside it, there's an overpass over the railroad, and you may see that there's a dark space underneath the overpass. This is, of course, because we flew looking straight down, and neither the LiDAR nor our spectral imager was able to penetrate through the overpass to see down below. So this is the cool three-dimensional image. What are we going to do with this three-dimensional image? We can see the trees, we can see all the different aspects of this region. So we also took hyperspectral imagery at the same time, and I spent some time with the hyperspectral images, choosing examples that were clearly a tree, clearly dirt, clearly gravel, clearly the railroad ties, and use those to generate a spectral library, which you can see here at the right. So all these that are colored in the various bits of green are obviously plants. Here's the chlorophyll peak around 520 nanometers. Here's the red edge. Then we also have three different kinds of gravel. And then this right here, which is the rails are very shiny. This is essentially the spectrum of the sun. We're looking at a shiny thing in the object. And so we can then apply that classification, and any pixel whose spectrum is most like that red spectrum I showed, which I said was the sun, is going to be classified as rail or metal. And you'll notice there's a railing on the overpass. These pieces are made of metal as well, and they reflect light. And then you can see quite clearly the rails. We can also see this gray, which is classified as the railroad tie. I chose the railroad tie as the spectral source for that. It turns out the overpass is classified as the same material. So based on this, I come to the conclusion that the rails in this particular railroad must be made of concrete. And I checked with the people at Deutsche Bahn, and indeed they use concrete rail ties. And so this is again the various different spectra of the plants, and this, let's see, where was the railroad tie? It looks very similar to the gravel, but seems to have a slightly different spectrum here in the near infrared, and that's how we can differentiate between them. And then we're using sunlight, and there was not a lot of light past 900 nanometers, and also not a lot of really interesting structure there. And so we were able to truncate our spectral analysis and only look at wavelengths up to 930 nanometers, so we wouldn't get confused by false identifications with this essentially random noise. So applying this classification to the railroad, we can classify and say what the various parts are, and then we can fuse this data with our digital elevation model to give a three-dimensional model of what we've seen. And in the northern end of this, I'm using the red, green, and blue bands from the hyperspectral imagery. So basically, it's just a color photo. And in the south portion, I've used our classification. And so this is sort of a half classified, half RGB image superimposed on the digital elevation model. And those areas not covered by the relatively narrow swath of the hyperspectral imagery, I've covered with images from Google Maps. And so this is, again, the same thing. The railroad is actually kind of down in a pit or a trench there. We can't actually see through the ground, but if we could, this would be what it would look like from underneath. And then if you'll notice right around here, it looks like there's something that's coming pretty close to the tracks. That this would be a tree that might be a problem in terms of encroaching on the railroad. This area right here is where I'm talking about, where this seems uncomfortably close and might be someplace that the trees might need to be trimmed. And in particular, if analysis indicated to us that the trees were in poor health, they would need to be removed to protect the infrastructure. So one of the things that we can do in terms of looking at plant health is we can look at NDVI, this normalized difference vegetation index I talked about. There's a large number of other simple ratios or mathematical analyses between various spectral bands. And for this particular one, I've chosen the modified chlorophyll absorption in reflectance index, which is one of the 7 indexes that we produce in our AgView software. And I've applied this to the railroad. And you can see, of course, the dirt and the concrete has a very, very low chlorophyll index. And then we can see some plants are going to have lower indices, some plants are going to have higher indices, and an area where we see that there is plants, but it's sort of red or yellow, that might indicate that there's some stress to the plants and that we would want to look at those in terms of trimming for the infrastructure. And this is the same thing where I've shown it up. Once again, this problem area right here, the main tree looks okay. There's some questionable areas down here at the bottom. So we want to look at this and see if this is something that needs to be trimmed. So a little close, the trains are going to be coming here, a little close to the track. What is the status of this tree? Now, we don't only have the spectral information. We don't only have the digital elevation map. We actually have this 3-dimensional imagery, and we can use that to determine whether this particular region is worthy of attention. So here's what we see in the classified image. Here's what we see in the LiDAR point cloud looking nadir. But if we rotate the LiDAR point cloud a little bit, we can see that there's only a couple of meters distance from the tree to the track, but it's 16 meters above the track. And so if this tree were unhealthy, it would need to be trimmed. But since our vegetation analysis indicated it's probably a pretty healthy tree. It's 16 meters above the track. It's not going to cause any problem. And so this is the sort of analysis that can be done by flying along a railroad track, or in my next example, flying along some power lines. So here is another, once again, taken in Germany. And again, they're very good about trimming their trees near their infrastructure, where we flew along some power lines. And again, I've taken this point cloud and separated the power pylons, the power lines, and then the surrounding vegetation as different groups and colored them appropriately. And you can see that, you can see the catenaries in the power lines. And if we look again, one of these cool three-dimensional images, this is the area that we flew over. And we went parallel to these power lines, and we want to see what can we see around them. Okay, so now I've gone, and in the next slide I'll show you how I did the classification, but once again, different classes, 4 types of vegetation, what seems to me to be exposed dirt, 2 types of concrete, and the wires from the power lines. These are the spectra that I used, 3 different types of trees and shrubs. This is an image of the classification program that we use. It's part of our Spectral View software. It allows the user, and this is what I did, was for the example of dirt, I clicked over here where there's dirt, and then it gave me a spectrum. That's this brown one right here. And then I was able to choose a number of pixels that seemed to match that spectrum, generated an average spectrum, and then used that to classify the whole image. And I did that for each of these different classes of materials in these images. And so I can then do the classification based on this library. Oh, just a minute. I think that was something went out of sequence here. Nope, I guess I just lost it. So that's basically it. Sorry about that. Okay, and now I'm not sharing my screen anymore, am I? So let me share this screen right here. Okay, and now we're back in business. And I do have some other 3-dimensional images of these, but there were some, what you might see is that, let's see if I can go back. I can't. Just a minute here. I really apologize for this. My screen, what happened was David adjusted my slides and I lost some, and that's why I'm confused. So I want to be, oh goodness. Really apologize for this. I don't know what we're, okay, share. Okay, and then I really don't know what, there we go. I'm assuming that this is probably what I wanted to show. So now I'm going to move on to a different set of analysis, which is what we did, basically looking for copper ore. Okay, so we've done some flights in mines, and we've also done some flights in the area, the undisturbed geology around the mines. And in these data, we're going to be looking at the shortwave infrared, because most of the minerals that are economically valuable. So, next slide. Here's where we were, a beautiful place in Utah, near the town of Moab. It's about 10 or 20 miles from an active copper mine. And in these exposed strata here are many of the minerals that are associated with the concentration of copper. And so we flew up and down this hillside with our LiDAR and with our hyperspectral, generated a 3-dimensional model, and tried to figure out what the different minerals were in this. So here again is this picture that we actually took off from right about here. And then here is the three-dimensional model that we generated with the LiDAR, with the Google Maps draped over it. And then this funny colored thing, I'll explain in a minute, this is all the different minerals that we found. And that's the path that we flew up and down the hillside. And so here's a nadir view looking down on the area. Here's our small flight. And then here I have superimposed all these different colors. So if it's green, it's some sort of carbonate. If it's blue, it's gypsum. If it's various colors of red and orange, it's different types of white mica. And so these are all spectra that we actually had geologists who hiked up and down this hillside, picked up little rocks, took them back in the lab, took spectra from them, and we used those spectra to develop this classification in our software. Now, I told you before that when I was looking at the visible near-infrared data, down around 900 nanometers, the data were very noisy and I excluded them. In the shortwave infrared, between 900 and 930, the data are very noisy. And then there's a couple of water absorption bands in the 1400 and 1800 nanometer range. When we convert our data from raw hyperspectral data into reflectance, we have to take the data and divide by the spectrum of our calibration TARP. When you divide a small number by a small number in these regions, which are basically solar dark, you get weird numbers, high numbers, small numbers, lots of noise. And so again, for an accurate classification, we exclude these atmospheric absorption regions as we're trying to decide whether a given pixel is carbonate or mica or gypsum or one of these other types of minerals. Now, one thing I need to point out here is, in this case, we weren't interested in the vegetation. There were several different species of trees and shrubs there. They will show up as holes in our images because they were not classified because they're not made of any of these minerals. And so here is our three-dimensional model. Once again, this is just the hillside, and then here is all of the different minerals that we found on it. Now, in generating these three-dimensional models, they're pretty big. It takes a lot of data, and so we sort of have to downsample the images in order to get the three-dimensional image. And what we've recently done is we can now make three-dimensional images. They're huge. They're hundreds of megabytes, a few gigabytes big, but they contain every single pixel. And so I'm going to show you as my last slide an image of just the three-dimensional hyperspectral data at full resolution without the underneath. So this was 500 meters long with 40-meter wide swath, about 6.5 centimeter pixels. So every one of these pixels is classified. It's about the size of a small stone. And we can see these various groupings of the different types. It looks like there's quite a concentration of these white micas down on one of these benches. And then this is the best I can show here. There's a tremendous amount more data. We can zoom in and zoom in more and see all of these different bits. So finishing with the geology, that is most of what I had to talk about today. I would like to thank our colleague at GeoConcept in Germany, who worked with Deutsche Bahn, performed the flights over the railroads and the power lines for us. Of course, to Deutsche Bahn for allowing us, for stopping the trains and allowing us to fly over their railroads. Francesco Beccari is our European sales manager, and he really arranged all this with the GeoConcept people. And then Professor Barton at the University of Arizona is who we've worked with very closely to do all of our geological analysis. And that concludes the talk portion, and I guess if there's any time, I would be happy to take any additional questions. So in the slideshow, and I think I will wait a minute in case anybody has anything they'd like to ask me. And thank you all for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Carson and David, for a wonderful presentation. I think very exciting, and try to work on airborne hyperspectral is not that easy. It's very difficult with respect to stability and the attitude of the platform, the orthomosaic corrections of hyperspectral data, and that I could see. So I think till now we are not able to get the questions, but I have few just if I can get clarified. Some people have asked what is the source to get a hyperspectral sensor for the drone. I think they are listening to the head wall, so they should be able to know.
Yes, of course. So all the data that I've shown is using hyperspectral sensors that are designed and built by Headwall. And we have sensors that go from the ultraviolet out to the shortwave infrared.
So in the BNR spectrometer, you have noise beyond 900, and that's what also we realize that. So how to address that? That's the biggest challenge what we have. Because if you remember, 970 is a water absorption band. If at all I'm from BNR, I want to do some study related to water, I think I'm missing that. And most of the spectra, what I have is from 900 to 1000, I get all those zigzag noisy. So how to sort it out? Though we don't features.
So the visible near-infrared sensor, specifically the nano hyperspec that Carson was showing here, has a spectral bandpass of 400 to 1,000 nanometers.
Yeah.
So you pick up that coverage there. You also have some other options with an extended veneer, which is 550 nanometers up to 1700, and you also have the shortwave infrared, as Carson mentioned, which is 900 to 2500. So you do have a few sensor options for picking up that 900 to 1,000 nanometer bandpass as you requested.
Can we remove that? Then you can keep from 400 to 900 then. Why we have kept, if at all that we are not able to use that?
So it's noisy. If there are strong features, they can often be seen. What we do is we use average spectra. So when we're building up our spectral library, that noise tends to average out. And we found that even with the data being fairly noisy, using our spectral angle mapping, we can often match features out there in the 900 to 1,000 region. Once again, we can use, as David suggested, our near-infrared imager to get better data in that region.
Okay.
And then certainly, if in the system such as this this tractor that we showed, you could put lights on that, and if you can provide your own illumination, there's no problem past 900 nanometers.
Okay. Somebody has raised a question. Do Headwall Photonics LiDAR sensor for real-time canopy volume measurement? What is the spatial resolution of that LiDAR sensor, if at all? I don't think you have your own LiDAR sensor.
No, we use LiDAR sensors that are commercially available. They're actually designed, I believe, for autonomous vehicles. And the spatial resolution of those is down to about 3 to 10 centimeters. And we verified this by surveying ground control points. You can generally see small branches and twigs on trees. And you can see large leaves in them. In terms of real time, we do not currently have the ability to process the data real time, so we have to fly the area, download the data, and then it takes 10 to 15 minutes to process the data into the point cloud. So within the hour, you can have the full point cloud that you can look at the geometry of whatever it is that you're looking over, but it's not real time. There's not enough bandwidth from an airborne vehicle to send that kind of data back to a host computer.
Do you have any sensor to install an UAV to get a spectra starting from 400 to 2500? instead of having two sensors together, we want to have a sensor together, like you have the spectrometers, non-imaging spectrometers starting from 400 to 2500, like in case of AST. Do you have kind of system?
Yeah, Dr. Sahu, so to your question, there's, I think what you're addressing is the difference between a co-aligned sensor and a co-registered system.
Exactly.
And so you are correct in that with a co-aligned system, we've co-bore sighted the Vernier and the SWIR sensor to a point on the ground with great accuracy. However, the co-aligned system, we do have with a co-registered system, we do have a co-registered system, but it's a much more larger instrument. It's a much heavier instrument, and it's really not suited to the multi-rotor, to the small multi-rotor instruments that we have there, because just the size and weight of the instrument, of the co-registered instrument, it's a manned aircraft sensor as opposed to a small multi-rotor UAV.
So another point is that the sensor in our visible near-infrared system is made out of silicon. The sensor in our short-wave infrared system is made out of mercury cadmium telluride. These materials are really sort of optimized for these different wave bands, and it is possible to get sensors made out of materials like mercury cadmium telluride that will have response over that whole region, but they're not going to be as good. They're not going to have the same signal level as a dedicated silicon sensor for the visible and a dedicated mercury cadmium telluride sensor for the shortwave infrared. And so we do fly this co-aligned sensor. We get data for both, for covering the full region, just with an overlap in the 900 to 1000 nanometer range. And we've done some preliminary work on generating full spectrum images, but there's a couple of technological reasons you'll get better spectral data with two instruments than you will with a single one, and so there's always going to be a problem with fusing the data.
So how about the processing software which can give a single spectrum from a co-aligned spectrometer? Do you have any algorithms to put them together and co-aligned spectrometer data so that single pixel, if I click, I should be able to get a spectral profile starting from 400 to 2500?
So as I said, I have done that semi-manually on a couple of data sets. It's not yet folded into our full software, but that's something that we're actively working on. We're improving the quality of our orthorectification, and we're looking at ways to fuse these two data streams to generate a single hyperspectral image.
So what do you think, what are the challenges you have with respect to airborne hyperspectral, particularly for agriculture? Because you could cover, I know ground-based imaging spectrometer has huge applications. We have seen that. If you go down to your website and you see so many publications are there. So what do you think, what are the possible challenges to handle with when you do the research? Because we see a lot of issues we have with when you go for. So we would like to listen from you. What are those?
Okay. The fundamental issue with small UAVs are really wonderful because you can fly low to the ground and you can get very high resolution imagery. It's very easy with our sensors flying at 30 meters or so to get 2 centimeter resolution. Unfortunately, that means that you can't cover that much area. These aircraft can fly for a little under 20 minutes, and we can get good coverage of about 40 acres at a time. And so there's always going to be a limitation that you can't cover huge amounts of area. And then another issue that we're working on is trying to make all the data processing faster. There's huge amounts of data. A typical flight generates 12 gigabytes of raw data, which then becomes 36 gigabytes of data by the time it's processed into reflectance. Handling all that and doing all the various processes that are required to go from raw data to actionable intelligence, what are the plants, what are the minerals, can take a long time, and that's another active area of our software, is that we are trying to speed that process up. And David, you have any other things you'd like to mention about hyperspectral and agriculture?
No, I think we've covered it. Obviously, it's a very strategic initiative for the company. We are spending time, basically, as Carson said, engineering the complexity out of the data processing routines. We're trying to create application toolbox so that researchers and our end users can very easily program their own and do their own analysis of our data cubes. But just to add one point there, is obviously when you're dealing with multi-rotor UAVs with flight capacities of 20 to 30 minutes, that is obviously a limitation. And we are actively working and promoting UAVs that are much, much higher endurance than what we're typically seeing. So that represents kind of a next step forward for, I think, for agricultural agronomists, and Headwall as well, is to really provide higher endurance aircraft that will fly longer, capture more data, and at the same time spending our engineering time and effort to optimize the data processing workflows for efficiency, and also create an application toolbox so that users can easily exploit the image data sets that we deliver.
And the big switch that will allow us to have much longer flight times is switching from UAVs that are powered by batteries to UAVs that are powered by chemical fuels, gasoline or hydrogen. And you can get much, much, much longer flight times.
Yeah.
Those scenarios.
We expect a lot of solutions for agriculture problems, issues, some science questions raised in today's webinar, like identifying stress levels, and decomposing the composite stress effects on the plant, because this is the only hyperspectral which will be able to address those problems. Again, in the previous session, we were discussing about the weed identification and taking them out for herbicide applications. You have a pest, disease, or nutrient stress on the same plot, same field, how to discriminate them. So this is all hyperspectral which can address to, provided we have a hyperspectral both in BNR and also SUI range together. And then I think Purdue work, what you have shown is wonderful. Similar kind of study we have. In my session, I have shown one slide where we have 10,000 recessions, rice reels are there in the field. We have captured the image. Of course, not taken the hyperspectral yet, but this is what we are looking forward to discriminate at the field level, the plant type, with respect to biophysical and chemical attributes, and then identifying them with respect to the plant health and go for management. And the solution lies with the hyperspectral remote sensing, as we understand from the ground studies and average range studies. So that is one part. Second part is the solution what country needs is, I think many of the young guys they are looking forward is how to characterize the soil fertility, soil health, soil quality. So many studies outside people have done. Of course, beyond 2,500 nanometer, looking at MR spectroscopy and also thermal hyperspectral, people have characterized something. But we are trying to see if there is some possibility, looking at these imaging spectrometers, if you can find some solution to soil characterization with respect to the fertility parameters.
So typically, if you look at the Terra projects, the ARPA-E Terra 1 and Terra 2 projects, those involve both visible near-infrared sensors as well as the shortwave infrared sensors. And what they're doing in that regard is certainly using the SWIR instruments, the shortwave infrared instruments, for characterization of soil and things like that. So that's already a fully deployed solution, at least for that particular project. And relative to the phenotyping and the speciation, I don't know if you recall, I think it was my slide 6 or so, when I introduced the Terra 1 and 2 projects, you see a plot of an actual kind of photograph of the plot, but then right next to it, you see the color-coded subspecies of each of those different plant genotypes there. So it sounds like if you're looking for invasive species, that's something that's been fully characterized and can be done with the visible near-infrared sensor that I believe you have now. If you want to do very discrete spectral discrimination of plant phenotypes, we've got some evidence, and we showed that in that particular slide. And obviously the shortwave infrared, which can be mounted on the pheno rover, a tractor, or co-aligned system on the multi-rotor UAV, will address some of those soil characteristics or soil quantification qualification questions that you raised just a minute ago.
Yeah, so to add to that, soil is of course a mixture of organic and inorganic materials. The inorganic materials are going to be essentially minerals. And I brought up this slide of the flight that we took out in Utah. Most of what we flew over that was classified is basically dirt. It's fairly low organic content soil, but it's just exposed soil because we can't see through the plants. And so certainly with the shortwave infrared, you can do a lot of discrimination of what are the mineral contents of soils, and I haven't done any work on looking at characterizing the organic content of the soil.
Great. So similar kind of mobile platform we are going to have another month's time in our experimental field, where we are going to integrate our imaging spectrometer and also non-imaging spectrometer, what we have, including multispectral and also thermal or field phenotyping, also precision farming. There we would like to understand your expertise to integrate them so that with a proper capture with respect to the velocity and FPS, smooth capturing of the image and processing can be done. So thank you very much. Wonderful talk and interaction, and I must thanks to Mr. David and also Dr. Carson here, and also Electrotech International Chennai for coordinating mostly Shiva and Purushothaman and Padma. They have been day and night in touch with me to coordinate with you people and get finally things done. And we're really happy to see you here and delivering such an important talk on hyperspectral remote sensing, basically on drone. And thanks to our whole team to be part of this program and making it success.